February 3rd, 1943. A frozen command bunker 11 kilometers west of Stalingrad's ruins. The temperature inside hovers just above freezing, breath visible in the lamplight. Oberst Heinrich von Wiedenhoff stands over a map table scattered with outdated intelligence reports, his fingers trembling, not from cold, but from something far more insidious. The radio beside him crackles with static, then silence. The silence that confirms what he already knows. The Sixth Army is gone. 300,000 men vanished into the frozen wasteland of the Volga. Von Wiedenhoff has served since Poland, witnessed the triumph in France, led panzer battalions across the steppes toward Moscow. He has seen the Wehrmacht at its zenith, invincible and unstoppable. But standing here now, staring at the red pencil marks indicating Soviet positions that seem to multiply with each passing hour, something shifts in his chest. A cold realization settles over him like the Russian winter itself. His aide, Hauptmann Steiner, enters carrying the latest casualty reports from Army Group Don. The young officer's face is gaunt, aged a decade in the past 3 months. He places the documents on the table without speaking. Von Wiedenhoff doesn't need to read them. He's seen the pattern emerging since late January. The numbers tell a story that Wehrmacht doctrine never prepared them for. Herr Oberst, Steiner's voice cracks slightly. The intelligence summary from Harris Group Mittel. They're reporting Soviet reinforcements moving west. 60 divisions, fresh troops, new equipment. They estimate... I know what they estimate. Von Wiedenhoff cuts him off. His eyes remain fixed on the map, on the vast expanse of Soviet territory still stretching eastward beyond the paper's edge. Tell me, Hauptmann, how many divisions did we destroy in the first 6 months of Barbarossa? Steiner hesitates. The official figures claimed over 300 Soviet divisions destroyed or rendered combat effective, Herr Oberst. 300. Von Wiedenhoff lets the number hang in the frozen air. And yet, here they are, more than before. Better equipped than before. He traces his finger along the Volga, then westward, following the advancing red arrows his staff has been marking for weeks. Do you understand what this means? The question isn't rhetorical, but Steiner doesn't answer. He doesn't need to. Both men understand the realization spreading through Wehrmacht headquarters from Leningrad to the Caucasus. They are not fighting a nation on the brink of collapse. They are fighting something that grows stronger with each month, each sacrifice, each kilometer of scorched earth. Outside, the distinctive rumble of Soviet artillery begins its evening bombardment. 20 kilometers away, close enough to rattle the bunker's wooden support beams. Von Wiedenhoff watches dust fall from the ceiling timbers. A month ago, the nearest Soviet guns were 40 kilometers distant. 2 weeks ago, 25. The mathematics of retreat, of defensive lines that fold like paper, of reinforcements that never arrive while the enemy seems to manifest divisions from the very soil itself. He remembers a conversation from last summer before the drive toward Stalingrad began. Generaloberst Paulus, confident, assured, speaking of the coming victory. We'll be in the Caucasus by October. The Soviets are spent. One more push. Von Wittinghoff had believed him. They all had. The intelligence reports showed Soviet industry in shambles, cities captured, millions of prisoners. How could they continue? But they did continue. And now Paulus is either dead or captured. The reports conflict, and the Sixth Army exists only in memory and in the growing lists of missing and killed in action that flow westward like a river of grief. Steiner clears his throat. "Sir, the withdrawal order. Shall I prepare the staff for departure?" Withdrawal. The word itself feels like surrender. Von Wittinghoff thinks of the communiques from Berlin, from the Führer's headquarters, speaking of holding every meter, of fighting to the last man, of the inevitable German victory. Words that sound increasingly hollow against the reality of Soviet T-34s punching through defensive lines, of Katyusha rockets turning supply depots into infernos, of Guards rifle divisions that attack in weather no German soldier would dare to march in. "Yes," he says finally, "begin preparations." And Hauptmann? He pauses, choosing his words carefully. "Ensure the men understand. This isn't a retreat. This is a tactical realignment." The lie tastes bitter, but what else can he say? That they're running from an enemy they can no longer defeat? That the vaunted Wehrmacht, conqueror of Europe, has met a force it cannot break? The artillery outside intensifies, closer now, always closer. Von Wittinghoff folds the map carefully, professionally, as if order and precision can somehow restore the certainty they've lost. But his hands still tremble, and in the lamplight, his shadow on the bunker wall seems to shrink rather than grow. In the hours that follow, as the staff prepares for another withdrawal westward, von Wittinghoff sits alone with his thoughts. He thinks of home, of Germany, of the promises made when they crossed the border nearly 2 years ago. 3 months to Moscow, 6 months to victory. The Soviet Union would collapse like a house of cards. Instead, it was Germany's certainty that collapsed. Here in the frozen ruins of Stalingrad, in the endless retreats, in the growing realization that the enemy they face possesses something beyond mere numbers, a willingness to sacrifice, to suffer, to die and be replaced by more soldiers, more tanks, more guns than German intelligence ever believed possible. This is the awakening, not dramatic, not sudden, but slow and terrible and irrevocable. June 28th, 1943. A Wehrmacht planning room in Orel, 200 kilometers north of Kursk. The summer heat makes the cramped space stifling, despite the open windows. General Major Walter Model stands before a relief map of the Kursk salient, its contours marked with the now familiar symbols of Soviet defensive positions. The map is 3 days old. Already, reconnaissance reports suggest it's obsolete. Model is known throughout the Wehrmacht as a defensive genius, a man who can hold impossible positions, who somehow conjures victory from the jaws of defeat. But as he surveys the massive Soviet bulge jutting into German lines, even his legendary confidence seems diminished. His staff officers crowd around the table, their faces reflecting what none dare speak aloud. Operation Citadel, the Great Offensive, meant to restore German initiative in the east, feels like desperation masquerading as strategy. Oberst Hermann Glantz, Chief of Intelligence for the Ninth Army, spreads new aerial reconnaissance photographs across the table. Herr General, the latest imagery from yesterday's sortie. The Soviets have constructed 6 defensive belts across our intended axis of advance. Tank traps, anti-tank ditches, minefields extending over 40 kilometers in depth. Model studies the photographs through his reading glasses. Each image shows the same story. Vast networks of fortifications, artillery positions dug into the earth, bunkers reinforced with concrete and steel. The kind of defensive preparation that takes months, that requires foreknowledge of exactly where the attack will come. He knows, Model says quietly. He knows precisely where we intend to strike, how many divisions will commit, probably even the exact date we plan to begin. He looks up at his officers. Gentlemen, we are walking into a prepared killing ground. Glantz nods grimly. Intelligence suggests the Soviets have concentrated over 1 million men in the Kursk sector, perhaps 3,000 tanks. Artillery concentrations we've never seen before. They're not preparing to defend, Herr General. They're preparing to bleed us white, then counterattack. The room falls silent, except for the buzz of flies against the window glass. Model removes his glasses, pinches the bridge of his nose. He's 52 years old, has commanded armies since France, earned the Knight's Cross for his defense of the Rzhev salient. He knows warfare, knows the mathematics of offensive operations, knows what success requires. And he knows with absolute certainty that Citadel will fail. How many tigers and panthers will we have for the offensive? Model asks his operations officer. 200 tigers, approximately 200 panthers, Herr General. The panthers are new, still experiencing mechanical issues. Several battalions report readiness rates below 50%. 200 tigers against 3,000 Soviet tanks. Model does the calculation instinctively. Even if each tiger destroys 10 enemy tanks, an absurdly optimistic ratio, the Soviets will still have overwhelming numerical superiority. And that doesn't account for the Soviet anti-tank guns, the ground attack aircraft, the artillery that will turn German assembly areas into graveyards. Major Werner Hoffmann, Model's operations officer, speaks up. Sir, if I may, Berlin expects this offensive to succeed. The Führer himself has insisted that Citadel will restore German prestige in the East, demonstrate to our enemies that we retain the initiative. Berlin. Model repeats the word as if it's foreign to him. Berlin is 1,000 kilometers from here, Major. Berlin believes what Berlin wishes to believe. He gestures at the map. This is reality. The Soviets have used the 5 months since Stalingrad to rebuild their forces, to prepare defenses that would make the Maginot Line look like a sand castle. They have factories running 24 hours a day, producing tanks faster than we can destroy them. They have manpower reserves we cannot match. And most importantly, he pauses, making eye contact with each officer. They have learned how to fight us. The admission hangs heavy in the stifling air. In the early days of Barbarossa, Soviet forces were disorganized, poorly led, equipped with obsolete weapons. German tactical superiority made up for numerical inferiority. Blitzkrieg worked because the enemy couldn't adapt fast enough. But that was 2 years ago. 2 years of continuous warfare, of Soviet generals learning through trial and blood and catastrophic losses. 2 years of their industry evacuating east, beyond German reach, churning out weapons in quantities that make German production look quaint. 2 years of German supply lines stretching ever longer while Soviet lines grow shorter. Clance pulls out another document. Intelligence assessment from Army Group Center, sir. It estimates that for every 3 Soviet soldiers we kill or capture, 4 more are trained and equipped. For every tank we destroy, 2 more roll off production lines in the Urals. The mathematical trajectory is unfavorable. Unfavorable. Such a clinical word for catastrophe. Model walks to the window, looks out over the dusty streets of Orel. Below, German soldiers move about their duties, maintaining equipment, running drills. Young men, most of them, too young to remember the last war, filled with propaganda about German superiority and inevitable victory. How many of them will die in the Kursk salient? How many will burn alive in disabled Panthers? How many will be buried in unmarked graves while the Soviet steamroller continues westward? Postpone, Model says suddenly, turning back to his staff. I want a recommendation sent to OKH. Postpone Citadel indefinitely. Better yet, cancel it entirely. Recommend we adopt a purely defensive posture. Force the Soviets to attack us. Bleed them on ground we choose. The officers exchange glances. They all know Model's recommendation will be ignored. Hitler has already postponed Citadel twice, waiting for more tigers, for better weather, for circumstances that will never align in Germany's favor. To cancel now would be to admit what cannot be admitted, that the initiative has permanently shifted, that the best Germany can hope for is an organized fighting retreat, that the road from here leads inexorably westward. Hoffman speaks carefully. Sir, with respect, if we don't attack at Kursk, the Soviets will. Their intelligence is as good as ours. They know our strength is eroding, that each month favors them. If we remain passive, they'll choose the time and place for their offensive. Then let them attack, Model snaps. Let them come to us, pay in blood for every kilometer. Defense is our only chance now. Offense, he gestures at the map, at the impossible maze of Soviet fortifications. Offense is suicide. But even as he says it, Model knows the decision isn't his to make. In Berlin, in the Führer's headquarters, men who have never seen the Eastern Front make plans based on maps and optimism. They speak of wonder weapons, of German genius, of the inherent superiority of the German soldier.
They do not speak of the factories beyond the Urals, of the seemingly infinite Soviet manpower, of the T-34s that are crude but effective and can be produced in quantities that overwhelm German technical superiority. They do not speak of the fundamental shift that occurred somewhere between Moscow and Stalingrad, the moment when quantity became a quality all its own, when the Soviet Union's vast resources and willingness to sacrifice transformed from weakness into unstoppable momentum.
That evening, Model composes his report to Army High Command. He writes carefully, diplomatically, laying out the intelligence, the Soviet preparations, the risks inherent in Operation Citadel. He recommends postponement. He suggests alternative strategies. He does everything a professional officer should do when presenting unwelcome truths to superiors who don't want to hear them. And he knows with weary certainty that his recommendations will be ignored. Citadel will proceed. The Wehrmacht will attack into the teeth of prepared Soviet defenses. And when it fails, not if, but when, the road home will be that much longer, that much more desperate. In his private thoughts, Model realizes the terrible truth. Kursk isn't about victory. It's about maintaining the illusion of German military competence for a few more months. It's about delaying the inevitable reckoning when even Berlin must admit what officers like Model already know. The Red Army will never stop. Not until they reach Berlin itself.
July 12, 1943. The fields south of Prokhorovka, dawn breaking over the steppe. SS Hauptsturmführer Mikhail Wittmann sits in the commander's position of his Tiger I, turret number 1331, watching the sunrise paint the wheat fields gold and red. He's 29 years old, already credited with 30 tank kills on the Eastern Front, a veteran of Demyansk and the southern sector. His crew has fought together for 8 months, long enough to develop the intuition that keeps men alive in tank warfare, but not so long that they've lost the edge. The radio crackles. All units prepare to advance. Enemy tank formation spotted, bearing northeast, distance 4,000 meters. Wittmann raises his binoculars. At first he sees nothing but rolling terrain and morning mist. Then, as the sun climbs higher, the mist begins to clear. What emerges from that clearing makes his blood run cold. Tanks. Not a company, not a battalion, an entire sea of Soviet armor, T-34s and T-70s, spreading across the steppe like a brown flood. 100 tanks, 200, more emerging from dead ground, from behind ridge lines, from the haze of distance. The greatest concentration of armor Wittmann has ever witnessed, moving forward in waves that seem to have no end. "Driver, halt!" Wittmann orders. His voice remains steady through training and discipline, but his mind races. "Gunner, target, tank, 11 o'clock, 1,800 meters." The gunner, Baltasar Wall, traverses the turret. Through his optics, he can see individual Soviet tanks more clearly now. They're not advancing in the careful, coordinated manner German doctrine teaches. They're surging forward in mass, accepting losses, pressing through the killing ground with the inevitability of a tidal wave. Range set, ready, Wall reports. Fire. The 88mm gun roars. Through his vision slit, Wittmann watches the round strike a T-34 in the turret ring. The Soviet tank lurches, smoke pouring from its hatches. One down, 200 more still coming.
All along the German line, Tigers and Panthers engage. The tactical situation is clear to Wittmann's practiced eye. This is exactly what General Model warned about. The Soviets aren't trying to win through superior tactics or technology. They're winning through sheer mass, through a willingness to accept catastrophic losses in exchange for overwhelming the German position. Target, tank, 12 o'clock, 1500. The order is interrupted by the scream of Soviet artillery. Katyusha rockets, dozens of them, saturate the German positions. The ground erupts in geysers of earth and fire. Wittmann's Tiger rocks from a near miss, dirt and debris rattling against the hull like hail. When the barrage lifts, the Soviet tanks are closer, 1,000 meters now. Close enough that Wittmann can see individual details, the crude welding on their hulls, the spare track links bolted to their armor, the commanders standing exposed in open turrets, urging their drivers forward despite the German fire cutting through their ranks. "Keep firing," Wittmann shouts into the radio. "All tanks, keep firing." His crew performs with mechanical precision. Load, aim, fire. Load, aim, fire. Each shot finds its mark. Wittmann is too skilled, his crew too experienced to miss at these ranges. But for every T-34 that dies, smoking and broken in the wheat, another takes its place, and another, and another. Through his periscope, Wittmann sees a Tiger 300 meters to his left brew up, hit from multiple angles simultaneously. The crew doesn't escape. A Panther begins reversing, engine screaming, trying to disengage. Soviet anti-tank shells bracket it, one finding the thinner side armor. The Panther stops, turret askew, black smoke pouring from every hatch. This is new warfare, not the elegant maneuver battles of France, not even the desperate defensive stands of last winter. This is industrial combat at its most brutal. Mass versus skill, quantity versus quality. The Soviet willingness to accept 10-to-1 loss ratios in exchange for ultimate victory through exhaustion. "Commander, we're down to 12 rounds of AP," the loader reports. Sweat streams down his face despite the morning cool. They've been firing for less than 20 minutes.
12 rounds. Wittmann does the math instinctively. Even if every shot kills a tank, unlikely in the chaos of close-range combat, that's 12 kills. There are still 50 Soviet tanks visible from his position alone, with more cresting the ridgeline behind them. The radio erupts with frantic calls. Tiger 1317 is hit, crew bailing out. Need support at grid 447889. We're being flanked. Where are the Stukas? We need air support now. But there are no Stukas. The Luftwaffe that dominated European skies 3 years ago is a shadow of itself, depleted by the Eastern Front's insatiable appetite for aircraft, challenged now by growing Soviet air power and desperately needed in the Mediterranean and over Germany itself. Wittmann makes the decision that separates survivors from corpses. "Driver, reverse, heading 270. We're disengaging." The Tiger lurches backward, turret facing forward, still firing. Wittmann watches the battlefield recede through his vision slits. The scene is apocalyptic. Dozens of burning tanks, both German and Soviet, transform the wheat fields into a smoking nightmare. Bodies lie scattered among the wreckage. The distinctive crack of 88mm guns mingles with the lighter reports of Soviet 76mm cannons and the scream of continuing rocket fire. But what strikes Wittmann most forcefully, what will haunt him in the years to come, is the relentless forward motion of the Soviet tide. Despite losses that would break any Western army, despite fields littered with destroyed T-34s, the Red Army continues advancing. New waves appear even as old ones die. It's like fighting the ocean itself. You might destroy individual waves, but the ocean never stops, never breaks, never retreats. 4 kilometers back, Wittmann's Tiger reaches a defensive position occupied by SS Panzer Grenadiers. The infantry look haggard, dust-covered, their eyes carrying the 1,000-yard stare of men who've seen too much. An Obersturmführer waves them into position behind a low ridge. "How many did you get?" the infantry officer asks, as Wittmann climbs from his turret, desperate for fresh air after the claustrophobic hell of combat. 7 confirmed, maybe 2 more probable. "And they're still coming?"
Wittmann doesn't need to answer. In the distance, the rumble of engines and crack of gunfire continues unabated. Smoke rises in a dozen columns. The sound is different from earlier German offensives. Instead of rapid, decisive engagement followed by breakthrough, this is the grinding noise of attrition, of mutual destruction, of an enemy who trades losses for momentum. An hour later, orders arrive for a general withdrawal. Citadel is effectively over. The great German offensive, designed to restore initiative, has ground itself to pieces against Soviet defenses. In 9 days of fighting, the Wehrmacht has advanced less than 30 kilometers at a cost it cannot sustain. The Soviets have lost more men, more tanks, more equipment, but unlike Germany, they can replace their losses. Unlike Germany, they have reserves waiting. Unlike Germany, they have an industrial base beyond the reach of enemy bombers. As Wittmann's Tiger retreats westward with the surviving armor, he passes columns of German infantry marching to new defensive positions. Their faces tell him they understand. This wasn't a temporary setback. This was the end of German offensive capability in the East. From here, there is only defense, only retreat, only the slow, grinding withdrawal westward. That night, bivouacked in a grove of pines, Wittmann's crew sits in silence around a small fire. They fought together for months, survived battles that killed thousands, proved themselves among the elite of German armored forces. But none of them speak of victory anymore. None of them discuss the strategic situation beyond the next day's objectives, because they all know. Every soldier from Kursk to Stalingrad knows, whether they admit it openly or simply carry the knowledge like a stone in their chest, the Red Army will never stop. Not until Germany itself is crushed beneath the weight of T-34s rolling down the streets of Berlin.
September 15th, 1943. A battalion headquarters near Smolensk, late afternoon. The autumn rains have begun, turning roads into rivers of mud, halting movement,
transforming the Eastern Front into a soggy morass of misery. Oberst Friedrich von Waldeck sits at a desk constructed from ammunition crates, writing letters to the families of men under his command who won't return home. 23 letters today, 18 yesterday. The stack grows faster than he can write. Von Waldeck is 47, old for active command, a veteran of the previous war who rejoined the colors in 1939. He's seen Verdun, knows what prolonged attrition looks like, understands the mathematics of unsustainable casualties. That experience, once valuable, has become a curse, because he recognizes the pattern emerging in the East, and the pattern is terrifying. His adjutant, Lieutenant Klaus Brenner, enters with the daily casualty report. The young officer's uniform is mud-spattered, his face drawn. He's 23, but looks 40. "Sir, the report from 3rd Company. Enemy attack at dawn, repulsed, but at cost. 12 killed, 27 wounded. Company effective strength now at 40%. Von Waldeck adds the numbers to his mental tally. His battalion began the summer with 860 men. Current strength, 412. Reinforcements arrived 3 weeks ago. 60 replacements, most straight from training, none with combat experience. 2/3 of those replacements are already casualties. And the Soviets, von Waldeck asks, though he already knows the answer. Intelligence estimates they lost approximately 80 men in the attack, sir. But fresh Soviet units were observed moving into positions opposite our sector last night. Appears to be a Guards Rifle Division, full strength. There it is, the pattern. Germany bleeds away its experienced soldiers, replaces them with untrained boys, and each replacement wave is less effective than the last. Meanwhile, the Soviets lose 2 men for every German casualty, sometimes 3, sometimes 5, and it doesn't matter. They have the men, they have the industrial capacity, they have the strategic depth to absorb losses that would cripple any other nation.
Von Waldeck puts down his pen, rubs his eyes. The letters can wait. The families can wait. Right now, he needs to understand how to keep his battalion alive for another day, another week, knowing that each small victory costs resources Germany cannot replace. A map hangs on the far wall, marked with colored pins showing unit positions. Von Waldeck studies it with professional detachment. 3 months ago, his battalion held positions 80 kilometers east of here. Then came the Soviet counteroffensive after Kursk, not a wild, disorganized charge like the early war, but a carefully planned, well-executed operation, supported by overwhelming artillery and air power. The German line bent, then broke, then retreated. Always retreating now. Oh, the communiques from Berlin speak of elastic defense and strategic withdrawals to prepared positions. But von Waldeck knows retreat when he sees it. He participated in enough retreats during the last war. The door opens again. Major Hans Richter, battalion executive officer, enters carrying a bottle and 2 metal cups. "Sir, I believe we could both use this." He pours schnapps into both cups without waiting for permission. Von Waldeck accepts the cup. To absent friends. They drink in silence. Outside, rain patters against the roof, and in the distance, the eternal rumble of artillery marks the front line, closer than yesterday. always closer. I had a conversation this morning, Richter says quietly, with a supply officer from Army Group Center. He told me something interesting. The Army is now rationing artillery shells, not because of transport difficulties, because production cannot meet demand. We're expending ammunition faster than the factories can manufacture it. Von Waldeck nods slowly, while the Soviets fire Katyusha barrages like they have infinite rockets. Precisely, Richter refills both cups. He also mentioned that panzer divisions are being issued captured T-34s to replace losses, not occasionally as expedients, as standard practice. We're fielding Soviet tanks because we cannot produce enough of our own. The implications settle over them like the autumn cold. Germany, the industrial powerhouse that conquered Europe, is losing the production war. The Soviets, written off as backward and primitive, are outproducing, outgunning, and outlasting the Wehrmacht.
Do you remember June of 41? Von Waldeck asks. When we crossed the border, the confidence we all felt. I believed, genuinely believed, that we'd be in Moscow by September, that the Soviets would collapse like the French. We all believed it, sir. We were fools. Von Waldeck stares into his cup. We looked at Soviet equipment, at their tactics in Finland, at the purges, and we concluded they were inferior. We saw what we wanted to see. We didn't understand. He pauses, searching for words. We didn't understand that we were fighting a different kind of war. Not a war of maneuver and brilliant tactics, but a war of resources, a war of survival, a war they were better prepared for than us. Richter pulls out a cigarette, offers one to von Waldeck. They smoke in contemplative silence. Finally, Richter speaks. So what do we do, sir, as officers, as soldiers? If the strategic situation is hopeless, what's our role? It's the question von Waldeck has wrestled with for months. The question every thinking officer on the Eastern Front confronts in dark moments. If Germany cannot win, if retreat is inevitable, if Berlin's orders are based on fantasy rather than reality, what is an officer's duty? We keep our men alive, von Waldeck says finally. We conduct organized retreats rather than routes. We make the Soviets pay for every kilometer. We do our duty as soldiers, even when the strategy is flawed and the objectives are impossible. Even knowing it delays the inevitable rather than preventing it? Yes. Von Waldeck crushes out his cigarette.
It's a bleak calculus, but it's the only one that makes sense. Von Waldeck thinks of the letters waiting on his desk, of the families who will receive them, of the boys buried in unmarked graves across the endless Russian landscape. Every day, more letters. Every week, more graves. And for what? For a few more kilometers of retreat, a few more days before the inevitable reckoning. But what choice exists? Surrender is unthinkable. Stalin's treatment of German POWs is notorious. Desertion means death. The only path is forward, which means backward, conducting the longest retreat in German military history while maintaining the fiction that somehow, some way, the situation might still be salvaged. The rain intensifies, drumming harder against the roof.
Somewhere out there, in the darkness and mud, German soldiers man defensive positions, knowing the Soviets will attack again tomorrow, or the next day, or the day after. Each attack will be repulsed, probably, at a cost the Wehrmacht can barely afford. And after each repulse, the line will shift slightly westward, giving up another village, another crossroads, another meaningless piece of territory that cost German blood to capture and now costs German blood to abandon. "Sir," Brenner appears at the door again. "Radio message from division. Intelligence reports major Soviet troop movements opposite our entire sector. They estimate an offensive will begin within 72 hours. Of course, always another offensive. The Soviets have learned the lesson Germany taught them. Maintain pressure. Never allow the enemy to rest, to reorganize, to prepare proper defenses. Attack, 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 using the endless manpower and industrial output to simply overwhelm opposition through sheer persistence." "Acknowledge receipt," von Waldeck orders. "Begin preparations for defensive operations. And lieutenants, inform company commanders that if the position becomes untenable, I authorize tactical withdrawal to the secondary line. No heroic last stands. We preserve the battalion."
After Brenner leaves, Richter raises his cup once more. To preservation, then, since victory is no longer on the menu. They drink. Outside, the rain continues, and somewhere in the darkness to the east, illuminated by flashes of distant lightning, the Red Army prepares its next move in the inexorable march westward, toward Smolensk, toward Warsaw, toward Germany itself. Von Waldeck returns to his letters. 23 families tonight. How many tomorrow? How many before this nightmare ends? He writes carefully, choosing words that offer dignity to the fallen, that provide some comfort to grieving parents and widows. He does not write what he truly thinks, that these men died in a war already lost, for objectives no longer achievable, in service to a strategy divorced from reality. Some truths are too terrible to commit to paper. Some realizations must remain unspoken, carried silently by officers who understand their duty even when they've lost faith in victory. The Red Army will never stop. This truth, once unthinkable, has become simply accepted. The only question now is how long Germany can delay the inevitable. How many more letters will be written? How many more boys will die defending the indefensible before the final reckoning arrives?